Creating a deployment installation for Autodesk products. Hello, my name is Brian Benton, and in this video we will take a look at creating an installation deployment of an Autodesk product. I will be using AutoCAD 2014 as an example, but for the most part all Autodesk deployments will look like this. There is an exception for AutoCAD or AutoCAD verticals where you can fine-tune many settings, but I will make sure to note that area when we arrive. So let's go ahead and get started. Topics covered in this video. We're going to take a look at mainly what a deployment is. Why create a deployment? We will look at several good reasons why you might want to create a deployment for your installation method. We'll take a look at the overview of the deployment creation process. Then we'll look at some best practices for creating deployments. Then we will actually create a deployment using AutoCAD 2014 as an example. What is a deployment? A deployment is a server-based image of product installation files. They're a named installation file that also helps you to customize to your environment. They're created with an interface that is extremely similar to the standard Autodesk product installer. The process is started from the normal Autodesk product installer. You start with a product. Then you create your deployment. You save it at a network location that's accessible by all of your workstations. Then you install it to each of the computers or workstations. Why create a deployment? A deployment is an efficient way to get a product installed on multiple computers. All licensing types can be installed this way: a network license, a standalone license, or a multi-seat standalone license type. Server-based images removes the need to distribute media to each workstation for installation. It allows for standardization of installations company-wide. You can customize the installation just once. You don't have to do that for every instance. It allows for unification of product registration. It helps you to include all service packs during installation. Logging options allows for installation tracking. This will help you to better manage your licensing requirements. It provides an easy and silent installation of a product. Let's go over the deployment process in a quick overview. First, you want to review the provided documentation. Most questions that you will have are already answered in this documentation. Then you'll create a network share. This provides a location where the deployment image will be stored on your company's network. You'll then run the installer and choose to create deployments as the option that you want. Then you create the deployment to get administrative image, which contains all the needed files. It deploys all the MST files that you need to run your deployment. And then after the deployment is created, you run it at a single workstation to test it out. You verify that the installation is working properly before you install it on other workstations. Now here are some best practices for creating your deployments. This is just a guide or rule of thumb that you're going to want to follow to help ensure that you have a more successful deployment creation. Create the deployment from a workstation instead of a server. This eliminates the need to run installation from the same computer all the time. Create the deployment to a shared network location from an administrative workstation. Do not create deployments over a WAN or a VPN. These connections are typically slower and they can cause errors during installation. Copy the media to a hard drive to speed up installation process and to reduce file corruption. Installing it from a DVD, CD, or thumb drive can cause some problems. Disable all antivirus software. Create a shared directory to store the deployment before you begin. Keep the name simple and short. Do not include spaces. Don't bury the directory too deeply. Make sure it's easily accessible. If creating multiple deployments, keep each image in a separate folder to avoid corrupting files. Create it on a FAT32 or NTFS file system only. Verify that all CAD users have read and write access to that deployment folder that you've created. Use uniform naming conventions, or UNC, instead of mapped drives. As an example, //server, whatever your server name is, /shared/folder, instead of a mapped drive with a letter like m:/folder. This way you know that you can actually access that folder on every workstation. A workstation may or may not have the files mapped the same way you do. Be aware of deployment type that you're creating. The default is standalone. If you're going to create a network license deployment, you will have to make sure to select that option before you finish. Make sure to choose the appropriate OS for deployment. Pay attention to the information links in the deployment creation wizard's sidebar. They change. They're not the same all the way throughout the process. Avoid modifying an existing deployment once it has been used to install a product. Avoid moving deployments between servers. If moved, it will need to be modified. Install to one workstation only and verify before installing elsewhere. This way you won't install it everywhere to find out that all of your time has been wasted because the deployment doesn't work. Now we're going to create a deployment. Launch your product's installer. Once you're there, in this example we're using Autodesk AutoCAD 2014, and once you're in the installer, go to the Create Deployment option. Here you're going to have to set up a few things. You're going to have to give your deployment configuration a name. Now we need to select the administrative image path. You should have already created this folder. This is the shared folder on your network where you're going to store your deployment. That way everyone that needs to can access it so they can install your product on their workstation. So click Browse. Go to your network, find the location that you've already created and browse to it. Try not to bury it too deep. Make sure it's shared and make sure there are no spaces in the folder file path names. So this is the folder where I'm going to save my AutoCAD 2014 installation in. I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to leave all of these options checked. I want to only include the products required for this deployment. I can turn that off and then add more to it later on. But right now I want to keep it clean. And I only want to install this specific product. So I suggest that you turn that on. We're going to run this installation in silent mode. What that means is that when you run the deployment file, it will just run with those options. You or your users will not have to do anything. Just run the file, let it install, and you're good to go. So that's what I want to do because I want to keep this process as simple as possible for myself and for everyone else involved. I also want to create a log file, and I'm going to save that file right here. It's in the same location as my image path, and that way they're together. And anytime this deployment is used, it will append that log file, letting you know who installed it and when. Once you're ready with these options, you can click Next. On the bottom of the screen here, you'll be able to get access to your installation help files just by clicking on this. It will open up your web browser and it will show you those help files. I will also look at the system requirements here. You can click on that to make sure everything is up to speed that you need on your hardware. And you can also click here for the README file. That will give you a lot of information about the installation and what you need to know. This part of the screen shows the end user license agreement. Now you have to click Accept to be able to go on. When you're finished, click Next. I am creating a standalone license type, or you can pick network. If you pick the network, you'll have to go through your network settings. But I'm going to create a standalone. For your product information, enter in your serial number and your product key. Now you cannot create a 30-day trial for a deployment, as you'll see here. You have to actually put in your serial numbers and product keys. Once you have entered in your product information, click Next. Now you need to go through your settings for your specific product. In this case, we have AutoCAD. You just click on this little arrow and it will go through the different settings that you would want or not want to install. I'm going to go with a typical installation. There are other local user profile contents that I want and support file paths. You can set that up here as well, which is great because if you have a custom block library or any other standards that you might use, like a template file or printer settings, etc., you're going to want to set that up here. You can create new folders, you can add them, you can locate them here, and it will all be taken care of during your deployment. So this is a really great feature, especially if you have multiple printers. You can set those up in your default printing support file path and a lot of other issues you can address. Any other additional files you might want to install, that could include block files, template files, etc. That will be taken care of here. Any user preferences you might want. If you want to create a desktop shortcut, you can create that here. There are a lot of different codes that you can put into your desktop shortcuts so that specific things load or start in a very special way. You can take care of that here as well. One of the best features of using an Autodesk deployment method of installation is that you have all of these controls set up. Just create it one time and then you have your deployment. This is the option here for any service packs that you may or may not want to include or install. This is the setting for your communication center options. You can turn it on, turn it off. If you have a special feed that you want your users to be able to go to, you can establish that here, and however they're going to access any online resources. So once you have created all of these and set them up the way you want, just click on the arrow here, and for any other options that you want. I don't want to include Autodesk Recap for this specific example. Turn that off. And here you can include additional software. So if you want to add something else, you can in this deployment. Once you are finished and you have everything set up, it will tell you the required disk space that is needed right here. And then you go and hit create. And now our deployment has been fully created. Just click on the finish button. Now just go to the workstations where you want your Autodesk product to be deployed, browse to that file you created and run it, and it will set up and install your Autodesk product.